Hey guys, it's Kemi and my review for Uncharted. So this film, we do center on Nathan Drake, and he used to be this, treasure hunter of sorts. He, broke into, museums and things like that to, steal artifacts, but these days he's just kind of working as, a bartender, doing whatever he can to kind of just get by, pickpocketing here and there, and one day he comes across Victor Sully, who is this fortune hunter of himself, and he basically tracks him down, and he wants to do what he can to make sure that they get their hands on this very valuable treasure and make sure it does not get into the hands of a very corporate billionaire. So here's the thing when it comes to Uncharted is that most of the time now, as you guys know, when I review movies on their own, not in a what I watched video or anything like that, most of the time it's because it's a movie I'm really fucking excited for and know that I will have more to say than I would if I just did, I will have too much to say to not do an individual review for it. So, most of the time I'm doing it, it's for a movie that I think looks really good. The problem is February as a month is kind of empty. Aside from the movie I just reviewed, Kimmy, there really were not a lot of films in February that I was particularly looking forward to. But I figured, Uncharted is without a doubt the biggest release of the month. I should probably try to get in a couple more, and by the end, Uncharted was the only other one that I really had any desire to talk about at a longer length, and so that's why I'm reviewing this now. I don't know how long this review is going to be honest with you, because I honestly don't have a ton to say when it comes to this movie. Uncharted, I was not particularly looking forward to at all. I will say, in terms of, the games, you guys know I'm not a big gamer or anything like that, so I don't have, the love that people have for Uncharted. I don't have that, close connection to the game that other people would. So any sort of any sort of disinterest I had for this film really had nothing to do with that. It was more so just the idea of it alone just didn't really seem particularly exciting to me. It just looked like a very bland and dull video game film. And, there have been some ones that have come out recently that haven't been the worst thing ever. But it just seemed like, once again, we have another one that could be a lot better, and it just wasn't really going to deliver in the way that we wanted it to. Certain casting choices and things like that just really, it was not working for me very much at all. It just looked like a very bland kind of action film and didn't really seem like much of anything else. But I was trying to stay as optimistic as I could that maybe it could surprise me. And look, I'll say this, Uncharted is not the train wreck that a lot of people feared that it was going to be, but is it a good movie? No, Uncharted is definitely not a good movie, very much at all. This is a very average, very throwaway type of adventure film that you definitely have seen done better before, but isn't quite as disastrous as I think people feared it was going to be, and we're just getting into right now. So starting off with the cast here, this is one of the areas of the film that I'm honestly pretty split on. I think some of the cast is really good, and some of it we'll get into. I will say the likes of which, the best of which is definitely Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. I know there have been a lot of criticism directed at him because he's a younger, he's younger than Nathan Drake is supposed to be, but clearly they're trying to do something different in this film, and I will fully respect that. And honestly, any chance that you have to cast Tom Holland in something, I think you should absolutely go for, because I think he is one of the most charismatic and likable actors really around right now. And as much as I'd love to see Tom Holland kind of get away from just action films and do more dramas and stuff like that, I do think overall he does a pretty good job in this film. He has a lot of energy. He really is doing what he can to try to sell this role as much as possible, and he's very likable in the role, I think, and I think that's something that did work very well here. He adds a few more layers to the Nathan Drake character that I think otherwise wouldn't have been there, and I think he did do a really strong job with that, and definitely did prove just, again, how much of a showman he really can be. I don't see Spider-Man in any way as a fluke. I think that he is a star. I think anything you put him in, he is going to shine through, and he really does continue to show that here, whether it's, again, just how charismatic he can be, but also just his, action, his more, thrilling action scenes and things like that. Holland really does shine through here, and I think he is, without a doubt, I think the best part of this entire film, but also really good in this movie, I do want to say. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Mark Wahlberg, who is horrendously miscast in this film. I know there have been just as many, if not more, again, a lot of controversy directed at him being cast. And whereas Holland, I was always on the side of, well, it's Tom Holland, he's probably gonna be really good. Mark Wahlberg, I don't really feel that as much these days. I feel like Mark Wahlberg these days just kind of takes whatever he's offered, and I feel like Uncharted is the perfect example of that, because from what I understand, the only reason he took on this role was because of the fact that they originally sought him out to play Nathan Drake back when they had this project in development, but he got too old for the role, and so they told him that he could, do something else, and I guess he wanted to play Sully, and it was not a very wise decision, because he is not very good in this film. Not only, I think, is he just not convincing as this character, but Wahlberg just doesn't really seem like he's into this role. He's kind of sleepwalking throughout this entire thing, and Sully clearly, again, I could be misreading things because I haven't played the game or anything like that, but it seems like they want Sully to be this like very sort of that they're very sort of this mentor of sorts that really cares a lot about Nathan Drake, someone who is very like selfless in that way. Maybe he has a few misdeeds that he's done here and there, but for the most part he is a really good guy. He's sort of like this father figure of sorts to him, and the way that Wahlberg plays him, that could not be further from the truth. I mean, he plays this guy in such a sleazy manner, and you just don't buy into the fact that there is supposed to be this sort of, relationship between these two. The chemistry is there between Holland and Wahlberg. They work well together, but I just never bought Wahlberg in this role, especially the moments where Sully is supposed to be a lot more of just this really just thoughtful sort of older man, to Drake, kind of like this father figure of sorts. It just really did not work for me at all. It very much felt like a bait and switch. Like 1 second, he's just being Mark Wahlberg and he's doing all these crazy things, and then all of a sudden, he's trying to be a lot more, tender in that way, and I just didn't fully buy into it. And I don't know what's been going on with Mark Wahlberg lately, but he really has not been impressing me, and I've always thought that Mark Wahlberg was like a better actor than people gave him flack for, but recently, he has not really been showing that, and I was not at all impressed by him in this role. I think similar to how Holland is the strongest element in the film, I think Wahlberg is the weakest element of the entire film. I did not really like what he did here very much at all. I think he's definitely the thing that really does bring this movie down significantly, and I really do think they should have rethought this casting choice quite a bit, because it never really works here. The rest of the cast, though, I do think for the most part does a really good job. Sophia Ali is very good as the character of Chloe. She's Chloe Fraser. She's someone you really do grow attached to in the film. She's very mysterious in that way, and I really liked what she ended up doing. She was easily one of my favorite parts of this entire movie. I thought that she did do a really good job. Tati Gabrielle is also really good as Joe Braddock. I'm not going to get too much into who she is and what her entire role in the movie is, but I think overall she did do a pretty good job. I will say Antonio Banderas is good here as well, but we'll get a little bit more into him a little bit later on. Overall, for the most part, the cast isn't really the problem here, aside from Wahlberg. But like overall, I think the cast did what they needed to do to make this work. Alright, now let's get to the directing and the writing, because I gotta be honest, I think aside from the, very poor casting choice in this movie, the directing is really the thing that should have been rethought, because from what I understand, this project has been shuffled around through so many different directors. It was once in the hands of like a Shane Black. You had someone like, you had Shane Black on board, you had Neil Berger, he was potentially going to step into the film. David O. Russell was going to take this on once, and the fact that they ended up settling with Ruben Fleischer, of all people, the director of Venom, who up to this point has really not shown that he can't do something that's better than Zombieland, I just don't think was a very smart decision, because his directing here is just not very good. It's not like his directing's like terrible, it just feels very stale. Like he just didn't really have much of a style here. It very much feels like this was something where he was contractually obligated to direct this film, didn't really put all that much effort in it. There's not a lot of style to this film, and I think that's what it's really missing missing. It's missing a specific vision, and I think that's what Fleischer just doesn't really have here. He doesn't really feel like he had a voice in this film, or that he had some sort of idea of how he wanted to tackle this project. It all just feels very stale, and I don't think he did a very good job directing-wise here at all. I'm not a big fan of Fleischer as a director, and this film really did improve me otherwise, that I just don't think he is that dynamic of a director. I think he needs to get a project that he's a lot more passionate about, and I think that he'll do a lot better. I think stuff like Venom and Uncharted, this is not really his strong suit. This is not really where he thrives. Maybe now that Venom's a lot more like goofier and things like that, it works better for him. But Uncharted especially, I just don't think he does a very good job when it comes to action franchise. I think if you give him like a really zany comedy, I think he can do a good job with that. I just don't think this film is really like in his wheelhouse, and I don't think he did a very good job here directing wise at all. The writing as well really does leave a lot to be desired in this film, especially when it comes to our characters here. Because look, Nathan Drake in this movie has a very simple motivation, and it is one that you can sort of latch onto. He is really just trying to get this treasure to complete a mission that him and his deceased brother didn't, and you do kind of latch onto that a little bit, and I do think they do an alright job with getting you latched onto his character, but there's so many gaps that we just don't know enough about. Like, what has he really been up to in that time? We know that he's bartending, we know that he's pickpocketing, but we really don't get a sense of who is Nathan Drake. What has he really been up to, you know, before this mission? What has happened in the years since his brother's passing? Like, we really don't get a sense of that at all, and I think that was definitely a really big issue for me in this movie, is that I did overall have a hard time latching onto Nathan Drake. I feel like the reason Nathan Drake is a character that you will find some enjoyment in is because, well, Tom Holland's playing him. It's not really because of anything, you know, going on with the writing here. I think the writing is honestly pretty weak when it comes to this film, and Sully as well, again, just not a very well written character. What they're trying to communicate with him, I don't really think works very well at all. Again, they're trying to make him like this father figure of sorts, but he's also someone that's clearly kind of in this for the money. He has his own sort of like, you know, he has his own sort of like material gain that he's getting from this, and I just wasn't a huge fan of the way they decided to write him. I think there's a lot of sort of there's just a lot of random sort of switches when it comes to this character, and I don't think it really works at all. There's a lot of things that come out of left field when it comes to Sully, and I don't think they do a very good job at developing him here, but there are things that do work really well. I will say everything they do in terms of the character of Chloe Fraser, I think is great. I think in terms of character writing, she's probably the character that's written the best. You get a sense of who she is. You understand a little bit of why she's on this mission and what she's really trying to do. And you get, you know, a good idea of what her role is in all of this. Why is she, you know, why does she care about what's going on? Why does she, you know, why does Nathan keep finding himself, you know, drawn to her? They do a pretty good job with that, and I think for me, that's where this film really did succeed, is when it came to her character. When she's on screen, I think the movie is actually really good in terms of the writing, and I think they did a pretty good job with that, but it feels like beyond that, they just didn't really know what they wanted to do here writing-wise. A lot of this film kind of does feel like a setup movie, and I hate to say that, but it very much does feel that way because there just isn't a lot going on writing-wise. It's just very simplistic in that way, and the mission is one where it's like, it's enough to, like, it's simple enough to where I don't think you're gonna find yourself bored, but it is one that I found myself very underwhelmed by, and I think they could have done a lot more with it. The villains also are so underwritten in this movie. They really do not do a good job when it comes to any of the villains here. Antonio Banderas especially is so underwritten. There's like really nothing to him in this movie, and Tati Gabrielle as well. There's a point in the movie where she becomes a little bit more prominent, and it's never really explained why she cares about this. Why does this matter? Why is she pursuing them? What's her goal in all of this? Like, we really don't have any idea of what's going on with this character, and I think that was definitely something that needed to be explored in order for me to really care. And it's, again, it's one of those instances where it's like, if they don't care, why should I? So I just don't think the writing here was very good here at all. I think there are a lot of gaps that they really needed to fill in, and they didn't. It feels like they had an idea of what they wanted this movie to be, and I just don't think it really succeeded in that way. I think that the writing was very weak here. I really just had a hard time latching on to what they were really trying to do. And again, I think even the stuff that they do well, Nathan Drake's emotional past, there is some good stuff there. I still felt very disconnected from it, and I don't think they did a very good job here with the writing here very much at all. So I think that is definitely a very weak element of this film. There's one direction the movie takes with the villains especially that I really felt was unearned. It happens way too early in the movie to make any sort of like significant impact, and especially considering what we get after that, I just don't think it really worked very much at all. I get what they were trying to go for, but the villains are so underwritten and their motivations are so unclear that it is just not something that we care about. And the movie itself doesn't really invest much time into this specific plot turn to really make it have an impact. So I think overall it was just a very strange decision as a whole. The movie also, I think, really has a problem with what to do in its screenplay to make it exciting other than characters just consistently double-crossing Nathan Drake. Because at first, it is rather exciting. You see this character, you think they're on his side, and then they make a heel turn and start, going against him. And that can be kind of interesting at first. The problem is they keep doing it over and over again, and after a while, it's just like, can we get into anything else in this movie? Can you give me a reason why they want to double-cross him? And I don't think they did a very strong job with that very much at all. I feel like they just didn't really have much of an idea when it came to these villains or what they need to do, other than the movie just needs villains, and that's what they're gonna do. So again, I think there are some elements that kind of work, but for everything that doesn't work, for everything that does work, there's something that doesn't, and I think that's what really does bring this film down overall. I will say, the cinematography here is surprisingly a lot better than I expected it to be. I actually really enjoyed a lot of the action sequences in this film, and I think that's something that actually does work quite well here. There's a lot of really strong action sequences. That plane sequence you've seen a lot in the trailers actually is very thrilling in context when you know what's going on. I thought they did a pretty good job when it came to that, but especially in the third act of this movie, most of the third act consists of this pirate ship of sorts that like flies, and that was easily the most I was into this film. That whole section of the movie I thought was honestly really well done. I was honestly kind of riveted with what was going on. I thought they did a really good job when it came to some of the action set pieces in this movie. They actually did put a lot of thought into them, and it made the movie a little bit more interesting than I expected it to be, and I think they did a pretty good job when it came to the action here. I think that was definitely one of the movie's stronger elements. In terms of cinematography itself, I don't think the movie's like badly shot or anything. I think especially when they're going on this mission, you get to see these really great, these beautiful locations. This is a globe-trotting mission of sorts. I think they do a good job with, showing you these artifacts and, the world building and things like that. I think that is overall pretty strong, and I think the cinematography is definitely one of the stronger elements of this movie. I also really do like the score here. I think Ramin Djawadi did a really good job at composing the score in this film. It's very thrilling. It really gets you into like the mood of what's going on. And similar to the action sequences, it does at points feel like a poor man's Indiana Jones, I won't lie, but I do think that it's still pretty fun. The score in that third act, like I said, I think was very thrilling. I really like the swashbuckling action of what's going on. I think it really is kind of like the saving grace of this entire movie when it comes to this film overall, because when there's not action going on, really, this film was kind of testing my patience at points, because it just wasn't particularly interesting in terms of character. The editing also is just not very good here. This movie is way too short, but it also is just not paced very well. There's not a lot happening in the first act of this movie. It takes a while to get into like the interesting elements when it comes to the heist and whatnot, but I think once the movie starts to, slowly sort of get us more into the more adventurous aspects. I think it's a lot more fun, but I just think the movie, it either needed to be longer or they needed to shave off like at least 15 to 20 minutes of the runtime. I'm not entirely sure which the issue is, but I can tell you that I don't think the pacing was all that strong here. So yeah, at the end of the day, I just don't think Uncharted is really that strong of a movie. It is definitely not a terrible film by any means. Tom Holland gives a really strong performance here. He brings a lot of heart and charisma to the role, and I think he does do a good job with that. There are some really strong action sequences, particularly when I talked about on the pirate ship. I thought they did a pretty good job with that. There are some interesting elements writing-wise, but they all feel so surface level. They never feel as dived into as they really could. The mission itself is way too simplified, and I think they could have done a much better job at really peeling back the layers. They had an opportunity, I think, to really do something different here. They've been really kind of hyping this up as like, this is not the games, we're kind of doing our own thing, and by the end of the movie, it really does just kind of feel like a setup. We're definitely going to get an Uncharted 2, because I do think this movie performed pretty well at the box office. I just don't know if overall, I just really hope if we do get that second movie that they have a much clearer vision of what they wanted to do this time around, because directing-wise and writing-wise, really did not do a great job with that. Villain-wise as well, really was not that strong in this movie, and I think overall there were a lot of things that they really could have done a lot better, especially, a certain casting choice as well. I think they really could have rethought. Overall, Uncharted is not the disaster that I think a lot of people feared it was going to be, but it really is nothing that special. It's a fairly average adventure movie that I've honestly kind of forgotten at this point, and I am going to give Uncharted a C+. But over, guys, to my review of Uncharted. Let me know what you guys saw this movie. All love your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.